Hey guys, welcome back to the Air Warfare Group. So most of you know by now that this channel is mostly about air warfare as it relates to our careers supporting air combat and air combat missions over our military history. And secondary to that is the enjoyment of history and air combat camaraderie through DCS World. DCS World is not the primary purpose here, it's just an ancillary purpose for how we choose to enjoy our histories in air warfare and share some of that with you guys. And today's video is about 5 things that you may not know about early aviation history as it relates to air warfare. And if you stick around to the end, you won't get any advertisements thrown at you, you won't get any requests to subscribe. All you'll get is a bonus. Number 5 is going to be a tie-in with an airplane, a special aircraft available in DCS World. But before we get to that one, let's go through our list. Number 1, the pilot scarf. Now, I have collected quite a few pilot scarves over the years as a collector of patches and other military memorabilia, if I can say that this morning. And I have traded away a lot of them for other stuff to get other swag and everything. And they were kind of cool. And, you know, I think part of the allure of a fighter pilot today, if you see, is their scarf. But let's talk about the history of that. Now, the early scarves in World War I were designed, number 1, for warmth, because you could have a huge leather coat on. If you wanted to bundle up around your neck, then it would be hard to turn your head, look around, and fight and everything. So they would take a scarf because it was a lot easier to maneuver around in it, and it was very versatile on how they could use it. Another thing they would use it for is to wipe off their windscreen or goggles from engine oil and residue from the guns when they would fire the guns. It was not uncommon to have pilots come back and take their goggles off and have everything but their eyes covered in oil from a long flight with an older engine that basically belched oil and gas out as it was running and stuff like that. Let alone if they take damage and have some engine oil damage that sprays it all over them too. So the goggles needed to be wiped, and the scarf was a good way to do that. And then finally, the scarf became a fighter pilot tradition, or a pilot in general tradition, because it just was downright sexy, and I think that's why it's maintained today. Now, having worked with aircrew flight equipment for 20 years and more, I have found that the new scarves are made out of nylon, and that's why the pilots don't fly with it. You'll see pilots go and get their flight gear, they'll go put their whatever personal effects they want to leave in their locker, and you'll see them hang their scarf in there because the scarf is made out of nylon, and that's a no-no in the cockpit environment. So, but remember, it's still around today, not really functional in the way it used to be, but it's just dang sexy. Now, number 2 is the dead stick landing. You've heard that phrase before, hey, I'm going to dead stick it in, or I'm making a dead stick landing. And what that comes from is from the early aviation propellers were made out of wood. And if your engine quit, or if your propeller disintegrated because, you know, it hit something, you know, it shattered, or it was hit by enemy fire, and it was no longer able to produce thrust to get you in the air or keep you in the air, then that basically was a dead stick. So you didn't have any power, and you basically, you know, were under a dead stick. When the stick is referred to as the propeller because it was made out of wood. Now, speaking of dead, let's talk about dead reckoning. Dead reckoning is a form of navigation that's been around for a long time. As a matter of fact, it was paired with pilotage and dead reckoning for a long time. And dead reckoning, basically, all it is it's the old-time maritime use of it. Basically describes navigation as a you know your initial position, you know your velocity, you know your speed and direction, and how long that velocity has been to maintain. And basically, with a watch and a compass and having a little bit of knowledge about the area you're in, you can basically find out where you're at, or estimate where you're at based on time and direction you've been traveling and everything. Now, this was originally called deductive reckoning, and in the dead reckoning, it's not DEAD. It used to be DED reckoning. It was just they shortened deductive and made it DED. And then eventually it got changed to dead, DEAD, which is not a good thing if you want to end up alive. Now, number 4, you'll hear this a lot. You know, he landed hot, or he's coming in for a hot landing. and everything. And it means different things depending on what your facet of aviation is. I know in Vietnam, a lot of guys used to talk about they'd come into a hot LZ and they would call on the radio, hey, we're coming in hot, means guns blazing, or that the LZ was going to be hot. They'd tell the guys in the back, hey, it's going to be a hot landing. We're going to go in there. But this part of landing hot doesn't mean that at all. Now, when I was learning to fly at the Beale Air Force Base Aero Club, I had some old codgers, not really from World War I. Some were from late World War II and in Korea that were basically pilots that were Aero Club members like me. Some of them were instructors, but a lot of them were just club flyers that wanted to fly with people. And landed hot comes from the early days of aviation before we had modern airports with lighting. And what they would do is these grass strips didn't have any modern lighting, so the airplanes would fly over. In the daytime it was no problem, but at night they would use, along with bonfires for navigation for like the airmail days and stuff, if you were going to land on an airport in the dark, let's say this is our landing strip right here, and what you would do is they would put a bonfire at one end of the landing strip and they'd put a bonfire at the other, and you were supposed to line up the two fires, land over the first fire and touch down, and you had to stop by the time you hit the second fire or before you hit the second fire. And if you landed too fast or you came in with too much energy and you floated the airplane or rolled through the full landing zone and hit that other fire, you ended up in the fire, and that's what landed hot means. Finally, Number 5. Number 5 is a unique airplane. It's actually a special airplane that is available in DCS World, and you may not know, but it was one of the innovative fighter designs of the turn of the century, or right after the turn of the century, that basically shaped all modern World War II fighters and beyond because of its design. It was cutting-edge technology. It is available in DCS World, and I'll let you guess which one it is by looking at this picture. And if you haven't figured it out yet, let me tell you about this. This aircraft was the first low-wing cantilever monoplane fighter with retractable landing gear, and to attain operational status, and it was introduced as a new vogue in fighter design, which was pretty cool. And you can fly it in DCS World. And what aircraft am I talking about? I'm talking about the Polikarpov I-16 iShack. This airplane is pretty cool. It's pretty fun to fly. I think I got it for about $15.50 with some points on the sale. What makes it so special, though, is it was ahead of its time. This airplane was designed in the late 20s to early 30s. Its first, they broke the molds on, they started the molds on the prototypes in June of 1933. It became operational in 1934, and it was actually produced from, I believe, 37. I don't have my notes with me, but it was produced all the way up until 1942, and it was revolutionary in many ways. It was the first aircraft to use a mix of materials. They had aircraft grade aluminum plus fabric, plus it had wooden structure, and it had metal spars. It used chromoly steel. It had retractable landing gear, which was an innovation in its time. It was, it's a really weird system. You got to unlock a cable. You got to crank it up with your arm. I have that all slaved to my HOTAS. And then you also have to crank it down and stuff like that. And then you have to lock it to keep it up. If you're going too fast in DCS World, you got too much airspeed, it will actually not crank up or crank down on you because it's just locked because the airspeed's so high. It was the first aircraft of its design to use modern flaps and ailerons, meaning that it had full moving aft surfaces that almost spanned across the whole wing that would drop down for flaps, and a lot of airplanes adopted that in the future. And then what was really kind of cool about it too is it was one of the first airplanes to use a pair of 7.62 by 54 rimmed weapon. It's basically the same round that the Mosin Ganot, if I can say that right. It was a very powerful weapon round. Not quite a 50 caliber, but definitely ahead of its time for the day. So this airplane is pretty fun to fly. If you guys get a chance, Google on it on YouTube and on the web about some of the history of it and everything like that. If you haven't tried it yet for the 2 weeks trial and you're on standalone, DCS standalone, go ahead and give it a try. And guys, I appreciate you. You know we're into the third week of our DCS month of World War II, working with 4YA and other servers to help promote World War II aircraft in DCS World. It's what ties us to the history of aviation combat all the way back to World War I when we first started doing that kind of warfare. And for me, it's really enjoyable to fly because it's a little bit more simplistic, it takes a little bit more pilot input, and it's actually pretty fun to get out there and fight at a little slower speed, going guns to guns or hand-to-hand combat, as I call it. So that's it for me. I want to thank you guys for hanging with us during this time. Stand by for the rest of the Warbird month to end in April, and then we will pick back up with our air warfare series, talking about offensive BFM and some of Tyro's videos. We'll talk to you guys later, and everybody stay safe.